From the library of the New York Stock Exchange at the corner of Wall and Broad Streets in New York City, you're inside the ICE House, our podcast from Intercontinental Exchange on markets, leadership, and vision in global business. The dream drivers that have made the NYSE an indispensable institution of global growth for over 225 years. Each week, we feature stories of those who hatch plans, create jobs, and harness the engine of capitalism. Right here, right now at the NYSE and at ICE's 12 exchanges and 6 clearinghouses around the world. And now welcome inside the ICE House. Here's your host, Josh King of Intercontinental Exchange.
We're delighted to bring our audience another episode of SLICE Uncut, which delivers listeners the full conversation between the New York Stock Exchange's Executive Vice Chairman Betty Liu and her guests on SLICE, an interview-style program that seeks to unearth what entrepreneurs and disruptive brands are doing to change our way of life and our future. This episode is Betty's conversation with John Chambers, founder and CEO of the venture capital firm JC2 Ventures. Prior to founding JC2, Chambers served as CEO and executive chairman at Cisco Systems, growing the company from $70 million when he joined in 1991 to $47 billion when he stepped down as CEO in 2015. At JC2 Ventures, John helps startups from around the world build and scale, with a focus on promoting entrepreneurship, gender equality, and accelerating overall new business creation around the world. In addition to his private sector career, he's been heavily engaged in global civic work for decades. He was the vice chairman of President George W. Bush's National Infrastructure Advisory Council and worked with the previous administration on President Bill Clinton's Trade Policy Committee. In 2018, John was appointed Global Ambassador of French Tech by President Emmanuel Macron and is the chairman of the U.S.-India Strategic Partnership Forum. And John also added author to his resume when he recently published his how-to guide, Connecting the Dots, Lessons for Leadership in a Startup World, that covers his new rules for disruption and lasting success in the digital age. Betty and John covered all those topics and more during a far-ranging conversation in the NYSE boardroom that was edited down for the Cheddar business broadcast. We picked up everything from the cutting room floor and we presented to you here inside the ICE House. How can companies connect the dots to understand the future of their business space, stay ahead of their competition, and ensure they are all disruptors and not the disrupted? Also, how can the global economy be prepared to create jobs as AI and digitization replace traditional manpower work? The full uncut slice conversation between the NYSE's Betty Liu and John Chambers, right after this.
And now a word from Planet Fitness. NYSE ticker PLNT.
The Planet Fitness Teen Summer Challenge is on. Now through September 1st, teens ages 15 through 18 can work out at Planet Fitness totally free. No catches, no commitments. Come in and use tons of cardio and strength equipment on your own, or sign up for one of our free teen fitness training classes. Visit any Planet Fitness to sign up for your free summer membership. Under 18 must have a parent or guardian present at sign up. Check out planetfitness.com to find a club near you. Participating locations only, independently owned and operated. See club for details.
John, thank you so much for joining me on SLICE.
Betty, it's a pleasure to be back with you again. Congratulations on your successful IPO in terms of being acquired by the New York Stock Exchange, and also how you are transforming the exchange together toward next generation leadership.
Thank you, John. And it's so great to be back with you here in a different setting.
It is.
But you and I have had so many conversations over the years, and it's been so incredible to see your career and what you did at Cisco, and now what you're doing, which I think is so cool. I want to talk about JC2, your venture fund.
Okay.
And I was reading a little bit about sort of your outlook, which is a little bit different than what other people say, because you hear so much about these big IPOs.
Yes.
So your sense is that venture funding is, off the charts and it's growing and, VC-backed companies are growing, but it's actually declined over the last 20 years.
Yes, it has.
Right? And that's something you want to bring out more and talk about.
I do. It's interesting in the next chapter of my life around JC2 Ventures. It's really about job creation and inclusive job creation across all 50 states and in Europe and in Asia. And it's about technology is probably going to destroy 20 to 40% of the jobs as we know them today. And that number may be conservative. And large companies won't add headcount. So if we don't get the startup engine going faster,
right.
if we don't get more venture capital spread into the system for a number of startups, we're not going to have the job creation for the next decade we need for 25 million job growth in the US and probably 10 to 15 million of jobs that we're going to destroy. So rather than let the problem come upon us, how do we prevent it ahead of time?
Right.
And to do that in a fun way and to be able to do it with startups, both as a advisor to startups around the world, but also particular emphasis, 18 of them that I coach and mentor today, and it's the time of my life. It's like having grandkids, Betty, and your kids aren't old enough to get there yet, but it is the neatest thing you do, except this time, these grandkids are my children and my partners in business growth, and I've seen every movie they're going to face, and I help them through it, and then watching them grow and expand, and I get my pick of the litter everywhere in the world. So 18 I picked, I love.
Well, I was going to ask, do you get pitched a lot? Like, how do you find the companies that are in your fund?
Well, originally I found them by the CEOs coming and wanting to have a coach, and then they'd have to convince their venture capital group that they need really a partner to help them grow and scale.
Right.
Now it's actually a 360 flywheel where the venture capital group realize companies are waiting longer to go public. They don't have as much experience on growing, scaling companies. That's my expertise. And also, I just love teaching. And so as you do it successfully with a couple of companies, then other CEOs ask you, and literally I get an opportunity almost in every hot startup there is to participate if I want to. I'm not sure that good, but I've seen every movie. And I've done some things right, and I've made mistakes, and that's really what they want is the lessons.
Right, they want the experience and how to scale, as you say, a
Yes.
business. I mean, you took, I think, Cisco, when you were CEO, from $1.5 billion to $47 billion in revenue. I mean, that's scaling a business.
400 people to 75,000.
Amazing.
And so it was just fun.
So we'll talk about that in a moment, but staying on JC2 though, so why do you think venture funding has gone down?
Well, I think it's a combination. I think one of the biggest mistakes you make in this new technology world, and it's about to change everything, every company will finally become a technology company. Every company will be a digital company. And that means the speed of change is going to occur even faster. But what is happening in today's environment is the US is no longer leading innovation. We're not even in the top 10 according to Bloomberg Index. Our startups have gone from 90% of the world's venture capital just 2 decades ago to 50% today. And we have not made the change in regulations and not made the change in ease of doing business and brought these startups across all 50 states. So our country, the number of IPOs, well, it's a good number. It's up year over year, back to your question about a lot of money going into the market. But these are unicorns that would have normally gone public a decade ago or 5 years ago. And so the number of startups actually were close to a 20-year low. And if you take out the big unicorns and how much money is going into that from the VC world, there isn't near as much money as we need to really grow the number of startups 2 or 3-fold to create those jobs. Countries that you would never consider ahead of us, France, went from 140 venture capital-backed startups per year to 740 in 4 years. India, which would be the last place you would invest in terms of being a very slow leader, is
right,
the
you
best
definitely
place in
don't
Asia.
think about,
And so now we've got to realize we need to reinvent ourselves, much like the exchange needs to reinvent itself, our country does in terms of startups, et cetera.
Well, I think if you're not reinventing yourself, you're going nowhere, right?
You disrupt or you get disrupted.
Exactly.
It isn't you don't go anywhere, you get left behind and you die.
That's true.
Yeah.
And I think that's something, thinking now about your Cisco career,
Yes.
that you had to constantly think about, right?
All the time.
So how did you make sure that you weren't disrupted?
Well, the first thing is you learn the lessons the hard way. I came out of West Virginia, which used to be the coal center of the world, 125,000 coal mine jobs. Today there isn't 160,000 in the whole U.S. It used to be the chemical center of the world with Carbide, DuPont, FMC, et cetera, and the chemical centers moved to other places. And we went from one of the most successful states in the union to being challenged. Very good people, but not with the job creation for our young people.
So you saw that up close.
Saw it up close. Then I went to Boston, 128. We couldn't even spell Silicon Valley. These were these crazy Californians. And we were the center of high tech. with the Wangs and the Data Generals and the Decks and literally the million jobs around them. And now there's not a single major high-tech company there. And so I've learned if you don't disrupt, you get left behind. If you keep doing the right thing too long, and that's the danger of being very successful, is you don't change.
Right.
Then you get disrupted very abruptly.
Then how did you?
You get Amazon, you get Googled, you get Uber, which are verbs now.
Well, and I always wonder about that with CEOs who run huge public companies.
Yes.
It's, as you mentioned, 75,000 employees.
Yes.
How do you make sure that they are constantly disrupting themselves, or that they're entrepreneurial? Because that's hard with 75,000 people.
You've raised about 3 or 4 different questions. The first is you have to start with the philosophy as CEO. If you're not changing, you're going to get disrupted. And then secondly, you're going to have to become a technology digital company, period, and move with a different speed of innovation. Now, what's working against you is the markets are very short-term focused.
Right.
And the pay is on this quarter, this year. Your shareholders don't want to hear you're taking risks for 3, 4, 5 years out. They look at the return. You can have shareholder activists jump in and destroy your business model. And I don't think it's good at all. And that's one of the reasons many companies are delaying going public, is because of the regulation strain and the other issues that I've alluded to on it. So it starts with the CEO. She or he has to determine they're going to disrupt themselves. Then they're not going to be able to attract the same level of talent that Wall Street used to be able to do, or GM or Walmart used to be able to do. You're now going to see that talent is going to startups. And that's true around the world. And the startups are taking a longer term attitude. It's almost 10 years before the average one goes public now. And so you're going to see big companies suddenly partner with startups in a way they would never have done even 5 years ago, much less 10 years ago. And it's because they want the innovation partners. So that's one of the key things that's happened in the market that I think is going to be pretty exciting for these startups. And then you've got to be careful. The big companies either love you too much or they don't love you at all, and they can burn resources. So how to do this partnership, I think, would be one of the fun things that will occur over the next couple of years. But you have a company like ASAP, which your viewers have never even heard of, stealth company here in New York City, and it is probably the top AI company, machine learning, in the nation. And they've gone from 1 million in orders to last year about 60-some million, this year way over 180 million.
Wow.
And their average order is 15 million first order. And it's because companies are looking at how you use artificial intelligence and partner with a startup to help create that urgency and the transition in a very unique way. I think that's a model for the future. Spark Cognition, another one of my startups out of Texas, this is public, partnered with Boeing to design the next FAA architecture for unmanned aircraft.
Right.
So I think the really creative, innovative companies, and make no mistake about it, those companies I was talking about in both categories, the larger companies are innovative, but they've learned they're going to innovate in a different way.
Right, as you say, through partnerships, perhaps.
With startups in a way that I wouldn't, because if you were to say as a partnership 10 years ago, advising your startup, I'd say don't partner with a big company, because first, unless you change their top line and bottom line, you're irrelevant.
Right.
And the partnership is more tactical. But today, what these startups bring is the innovation and the ability to recreate faster.
And think differently, right?
Exactly, and that's often what the CEO, she or he, wants.
Well, speaking about thinking differently, you mentioned earlier about how a lot of these startups, when they come to you, like they're asking you for coaching, right? Like they want to hear how you scale the business. So what are the most common questions you're asked by these
It's a great one, because I had a number of mentors, and I was fortunate and I really sought them out, but they were often mentors in a key category. I had some great government leaders, President Bush, President Clinton, Shimon Peres, who passed away about 2 years ago, one of the best I've ever seen. And then I had a lot of customers who were mentors at the CIO level, et cetera. And I think what the questions that I'm getting that are different than what I asked my mentors is more about outcomes. And how do you grow and scale a company? How do you handle your setbacks? How do you handle a crisis? How do you deal with a leader who's not developing? What do you need to do? How do you do an acquisition? How do you form culture? Because a startup CEO, she or he has to focus on strategy and vision for the company, developing, recruiting, retaining, and changing the leadership team, communications, and culture. And culture is the one they often underestimate.
That's so interesting.
You never have a strong company without a strong culture. You may or may not like the culture at a Microsoft, a Intel, a Cisco, an HP or an Uber, but you never see strong companies without it.
Well, even having started, my company,
Yes.
it was a very small company, I came to appreciate how important culture is.
Yes.
It starts from very small and it becomes even more important as you grow bigger and bigger.
And then communications, which Jack Welch, somebody
Yes.
that led 3 generations ago, great strategy and vision, very good on developing leadership, the teams at Crotonville, et cetera, understood the importance of the GE culture, but not a great communicator. In today's world as a CEO, your customers expect your company to respond to any issue brought to them through any channel in 5 minutes. 71% of the consumers do that. And so
that's different than years ago.
You've got to think differently. And on a crisis, as basic as it sounds, and this is one of the other things I do with my startups, is talk about successes and mistakes made. But I've seen this movie so many times. When you have a crisis, it's very simple. Determine how much of it was self-inflicted and how much of it was market-driven. Determine what you're going to do to deal with the crisis, outline it, and say what you're going to look like 1 and 2 and 3 years out. You then explain what happened to you in simple to understand terms, and then you report to your constituencies, whether it's the citizens, shareholders, the customers, or the employees, here's where you are in status and a regular update. And it's basically, and be transparent and deal with it once. You could say that's a great lesson for startups. It's also great lessons for some of what the high-tech companies have made the mistake on in the last year. So it's lessons learned the hard way.
So John, what has been the biggest difference? I mean, you were running a company with 75,000 people, and now you're at JC2 with 3 people. What's the big difference?
Well, some of it are similar. In other words, I build an ecosystem around me, just like I did at Cisco, with venture capitalists, with key customers to give you advice, industry expertise, the media that I trust, except this time I only deal with media I completely trust. And that hasn't changed, it's just a scale issue. But the thing that has changed is I have more control of my destiny, but it's also very humbling. You don't realize how much was being done for you ahead of time. I walked out of a very good media session last night with one of my startup, Sprinkler, and it was a great session. And I went out to call Uber, and I called Uber, and instead of Uber finding me immediately, it got lost twice, and then he dropped me. And I used to have my car roll up with security there. Here's my briefing on what I want to be doing the next, here's for tomorrow, etc. So some of the things I do miss, but as a whole, I love.
But it's fun in a way, right?
Oh, it is. I love being in control of my own destiny. And I do control it completely. I only do things that I really want to do. I don't do anything anymore in business that I really don't want to do, which is kind of cool.
Which is not always the case when you're running a big public company.
A lot of things
your schedule's
are just
not yours.
part of the job, and some things you have to do because of your role. And sometimes you can't be as transparent because you will step on customers' toes or political toes, etc. Fun thing today is I can say what I really believe, hopefully with class and Southern charm. You can judge whether I do or not. I try. But it's also, I think, just more relaxing for me. I have fun every day in everything I do.
So one of that is writing this book, right? Connecting the dots. So why did you write this book?
Well, I'm dyslexic. And dyslexics hate to read, and we actually read backwards and invert characters, etc. And so the last thing I ever thought I would do would be write a book. And yet, as I talked around the world, it didn't matter if I was in Dubai, Paris, London, Berlin, New York, Austin, Texas, Dubai, Shanghai, everybody was asking the same questions. And then they'd often say, John, why don't you write a book? And I didn't want to, but when I looked at it, we collected 587 different questions, but the top 25
were the most common.
90% commonality. So I tried to write a book more like you would work with a young CEO with an MBA class or a leader that wants to learn about mistakes made, etc. And so I wrote it in chapters, sharing with how do you deal with setbacks, which is the most important thing you can do for your 2 teenage boys. It isn't their successes they have, it's how do they handle the setbacks, and you'd do anything to help them through those setbacks almost. And it's how do you learn to communicate differently, it's how do you do acquisitions, it's how do you identify market transitions, it's what are the startups of the future going to look like.
You get to pick and choose what you want to do. And I noticed that, you've gone on and taken some really interesting roles. So one of them is Global Ambassador of Tech for France. So why did you take that on?
Well, I'm a believer that, as we alluded to earlier, the technology and digitization and AI is going to destroy a lot of jobs. Secondly, it doesn't matter if you're in France, the US, India, the venture capital is going into primarily Paris, New York, Silicon Valley, Delhi, and Mumbai. And if you've got states in India that have 50 million people, or 8 regions in France that are outside of Paris, you've got to bring the success across the board. So what I'm doing is trying to help the technology really spread and create jobs. And I measure my success in 50% job creation per year for all my startups. And we're well ahead of that now. And by definition, it means your revenue has to be well ahead of 70%. And do you do it inclusively? And who would have ever thought that France would have an American high-tech person, after Snowden and everything else, as their global ambassador? But yet that's what Macron understood. If France was going to change, he needed to bring people that brings new ideas and new concepts who truly care about the country and care about giving back. And I took 40 venture capitalists to France last December. We're probably going to do it again this September. And we showed them the startups. And it's gone from 140 venture capital backed startups per year to 743.
Wow.
And so it's up 5-fold at the time the US is going down. So it's the ability to make a difference, and you know what I'm going to do, Betty. I'm going to take the example in France and say to America,
right, like let's
we
do
have
the
to
same
do better.
thing. Yeah,
and
clearly
they move at a different speed. In America, it took me. You know how long I worked on tax reform and repatriation of earnings. 17 years. France changes things in 6 months. India demonetizes their currency in a weekend. They changed their angel tax investing for startups in India in 1 day after I talked to the Prime Minister and talked to the press about what was needed on it. We're moving too slow in this country. And while on some things with the administration I don't agree, what I do agree is the change in regulation. But we need a national digitization policy, and we need to become a startup nation again.
And we need to do it faster.
Faster.
You mentioned India too, so you're an advisor to the Prime Minister.
Modi.
What have you advised him on?
Oh, it's so fun because I had the chance to chair the U.S.-India Strategic Business Partnership Forum, which is the top companies working together, and to reset with the board our focus, not just about trade, but job creation in both countries, how you work with government toward common goals, how do you do this inclusively, and to really transform both India and the U.S. And we can learn a lot from each other. Modi is in the top 3 leaders I've ever met in my life. And if he gets reelected, and I think the odds are good that he will, I think he will not just set a stage for growth for India for 5 years, but for the next 25. They're going to be the fastest growing economy in the world. When I said that 4 years ago, in India, everybody said, no way. And yet it's growing now over 7%. It'll probably grow close to 10%. And it'll be more inclusive. And where I'm honored to be his advisor is how do you do a digital India? What does this mean for manufacturing? What does it mean for smart cities? What does it mean for startups? What does it mean for education, healthcare, the environment? And they're approaching it, and he's approaching it with a total globalization picture on how India leads in this. And so they've moved from a very slow follower leapfrogging to a fast innovator. And now all of a sudden they're saying, perhaps he's going too fast. I think he ought to go faster. But he's changing a country with a vision and a dream. And that's what Macron is attempting to do in France. But as you know, in France, they are resistant to change at a certain point. But I think he's absolutely got the right strategy and the vision for inclusiveness in France as well.
It gives you so much context. Anyone who says it's so hard to change, a ship, or it's so hard to turn around a big company, turning around a whole country.
Especially if they've been successful.
Yes.
But anybody who doesn't change will get left behind. And if there's one takeaway message for your viewers, is you disrupt or you get disrupted. You grow or you die.
And John, just before we go, I noticed that just in the course of our conversation and having gotten to know you, is that feedback is really important to you.
Yes, it is.
You seem to be always open to feedback, and you ask for it. So was that like a cornerstone of your leadership style?
It really was. There was only one Steve Jobs, and he just somehow knew what to build. And by the way, it took him 7 years. What I do is I just listen to my customers. and listen to our employees. And I treat employees as part of a family. I knew every illness of every employee, their spouse or their children. That's not just 75,000 employees. You include their spouses, their children, 250,000.
Right.
It was life-threatening. We were there for them like no one else. And that's why our attrition ran 5% in an industry that runs 15%. And that's why our acquired companies that you're acquiring people, next generation product, ran attrition at 4%. And that's unheard of. But it is that leadership style and then getting really bright people around me who can run with it, and we're much better together as a team. And then you can take these new emerging technologies that I'm betting on, like artificial intelligence, like the Internet of Things, like digitization, like cybersecurity. Maybe one more time, not only changing the world from job creation, but also changing world hunger with crickets and robotic Internet of Things, cloud-based cricket farming. When I first started sharing them here on the New York Stock Exchange on CNBC, everybody found them interesting. I said, this will be the next form of protein.
But you were like, no, this is the next.
And it was underhyped, and it is off to a race. So to do that and to listen constantly is what I believe is right in life. I also believe it's the right thing to work with governments and citizens for legitimate needs on privacy, etc. But be very careful. If businesses don't move, government will regulate, and the unintended consequences might do more harm than the good they're trying to solve.
And John, as part of JC2 Ventures, I'm really curious, what are the new technologies you're investing in that get you really excited?
Well, it's fun. What I try to do, Betty, is I look at a market and figure out where there's a business transition occurring combined with a technology transition. So much like the internet did, if you will, 20 years ago, its effect on telecom, voice being free, etc. These new models are built around business models that occur by every industry. Every industry will become a technology, a digital company. So the transitions often occur in finance industries first, or retail or manufacturing, almost never in healthcare and mining. Now they're happening across the board. The areas that I'm most optimistic on would be artificial intelligence, machine learning. It might be, along with the internet, the only technology that ever was not overhyped and actually exceeded expectations, and it will affect every company in terms of productivity and job transformation. Cybersecurity. As you begin to look across it, you're talking about security being an increasing issue. So the ability to do a phone where you take your Apple phone or your Android phone and slide it into a secure case, so it's nation-proof state capability is key. And that would be required first for defense workers, but also for you and I, because the bad guys can get on your phone, download whatever's there, or worse, turn it on or off anytime and take video of it. The security, I have 6 startups in the area. The 5 of the 6 are growing over 200%. The ag tech that I've talked about in terms of the next generation of protein, which is really an Internet of Things, cloud-based application for farming. And ag tech is probably the only underhyped technology I've seen in a while. And then everything from drones and how do you protect against unwanted drones and secure airspace, etc. Have the top company in drone that is doing that with Jorg handling it.
It's a wide variety.
It is very wide.
Of technology companies. And I imagine that you're having fun right now, investing in these companies, but I think fun has always been part of your leadership style.
We were on the New York Stock Exchange today, and one of the dealers on the floor came up and said, my brother worked for you and JP Morgan Chase and at Goldman Sachs 20 years ago. And I remembered him because he was one of the best salespeople we had ever had. But it was a culture. And he said, I enjoyed that so much. We built a family. And I enjoyed every day that I was at Cisco. There were times during the day I wasn't having fun. But as a whole, I really loved it. Now, what is cool about what I'm doing now, it is like being a grandparent. I get to not only pick my grandkids in terms of which startups that I work with or not, I get to give them advice. They think I'm reasonably intelligent. They also appreciate my mistakes. And then after I give them advice, I give them back to management on Friday evening, and I go have a bourbon and ginger. And so I'm having more fun, Betty, than I've ever had. And I think it's important in life that we enjoy what we're doing every day and trying to change the world in some small way at the same time.
John, thank you so much for
Betty,
this conversation.
It was a pleasure as always. It was a lot of fun.
It was.
Thanks so much for joining us inside the Ice House for a special uncut recording from the SLICE episode with John Chambers, which appeared on Cheddar Business and is part of Intercontinental Exchange's Insights that can be found at theice.com/insights. So that's our conversation for this week. Our guest was John Chambers, CEO of JC2 Ventures and Chairman Emeritus of Cisco. If you like what you heard, please rate us on iTunes so other folks know where to find us. And if you've got a comment or question you'd like one of our experts to tackle on a future show, email us at icehouse@theice.com or tweet at us at IceHousePodcast. Our show is produced by Pete Ash and Teresa DeLuca with production assistance from Steve Romanchuk and Ian Wolfe. I'm Josh King, your host, signing off from the Library of the New York Stock Exchange. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week.
Information contained in this podcast was obtained in part from publicly available sources and not independently verified. Neither ICE nor its affiliates make any representations or warranties, express or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the information and do not sponsor, approve, or endorse any of the content herein, all of which is presented solely for informational and educational purposes. Nothing herein constitutes an offer to sell, a solicitation of an offer to buy any security, or a recommendation of any security or trading practice. Some portions of the preceding conversation may have been edited for the purpose of length or clarity.